Good morning, ladies. Welcome to Mom to Mom. We're so glad you're all here. This is the month that we anticipate lowest attendance with sickness, right? But look at this room. Good job. Way to make it. Before we start, we just want to give a big thanks to all of our volunteers who help make this run so smoothly, from the setup crew who gets here at 8:30, Deanna making coffee, all the people who contribute to this. You are the reason we're able to do it. So thank you so much. We see you and we appreciate you. All right, I'm going to open our morning with prayer. If you would please bow your heads and pray with me. Lord, we just thank you for this time that we have this morning to be recharged and encouraged in our parenting journey. Thank you for the child care workers who are watching our children. Thank you for our speakers who have prepared a timely message for us, Lord. We give this morning to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Amy. So a few announcements for us. First is raffle tickets. If you made it through those back doors by 9:30, you would have gotten a raffle ticket. So hold on to that till the end. We're going to do a raffle. I know it's hard to get out of the house in the morning with small kids, but good job for doing it. It's a little incentive because we have a fun little raffle at the end of the morning. Snack signups. So there are 2 clipboards going to be circulating around the room. There's one at each of these corner tables. So if you guys want to pass it around your table and then kind of do a zigzag motion, just kind of give an eye to the table you're handing it to, like, have you seen this yet? If they haven't, then hand it to them. If they have, then give it to another table that hasn't, because there's this line in the middle that may be missed. So make sure to share the snack signups. They're double sides. So next month is our Christmas party, and we want to make sure that that table is stuffed with snacks and yummy goodness. Next are the blessing boxes that are going to be packed. And if you guys have any coloring pages from your children or letters or thank you cards, you can hand them. They're just actually a little basket out those doors that you can drop your sweet little messages on in. For the military people that so much appreciate our words of encouragement and thankfulness. So there are a couple thank you cards left back there that are blank if any of you want to grab one and fill it out this morning. And then lastly, our marriage event is going to be happening in March 1st and 2nd. It's a 2-day seminar, and the suitors, Tom and Racky suitors, will be putting this on. And if you guys remember Tom and Racky, they spoke last year. They're coming back again this year, and they will be running that. And so it should be an amazing time, a good time to refresh your guys' marriages. So put that on the calendar if you can make it.
Okay, I'm going to start off the morning by sharing a personal story that relates to our theme of Nourish and Flourish in parenting. In just a few minutes, our speakers will be sharing about a potentially challenging topic that we need to navigate as moms: how to talk to our kids about sex. That might be a bit of an uncomfortable topic. I've often found myself avoiding conversations because they make me feel uncomfortable. I even found myself attempting to control my environment and surroundings in order to prevent hard situations and avoid discomfort. If I can just get my kids to eat enough protein at breakfast, then maybe we won't have any meltdowns, right? But really, I don't have as much control as I think I do. And I can actually tolerate more discomfort than I think I can. While my story today isn't about the specific topic of talking about sex, it's about some recent opportunities I've had to practice sharing honestly with my kids about some other challenging topics, namely death and grief. Last month, I stood up here with a little 5-week-old baby growing inside of me. The following weekend, I had a miscarriage. I'm here today having worked through a lot of those feelings, but I'm still definitely walking through pain and sadness. And I felt like it was important that I shared today for that very reason. I'm not over it, but I'm in it, and that's okay. There are hard things that we're all walking through, or that we have walked through as moms. We have to figure out how to do that while parenting and taking care of our kids, who most certainly can sense when things are off. I believe we do our kids a disservice if we just put on a brave face and tell them that things are fine without showing them some of the broken aspects of what it means to be human. For me, part of owning my story has led me to be intentional about sharing openly and honestly with my kids. My husband and I make it a point to talk about whatever we're going through, joyful moments and hard moments, at an age-appropriate level. I've heard that kids are far more in tune to what's going on around them, especially when they're looking at their safe people, and we don't often give them enough credit for that. If we downplay or disregard our emotions or their intuition, telling them that everything is fine when it's really not, they could grow up doubting their own feelings and not knowing how to trust their God-given instincts, or even turning to unsafe people or things to help them unpack those feelings. I think it's important to validate what our kids are noticing so that we can be a safe space for them. So when my 4-year-old saw me crying a lot, I told him what was going on. "Why are you sad, Mommy?" "You noticed I'm sad." "You're right." "Well, I think the baby that was growing inside me has died." His little face got all bunched up and worried. I could tell he didn't quite know what to think or what to feel or what to do, so I shared how I was feeling. "I'm really sad, and it's okay for me to be sad. It's really hard right now, but I will be okay." I also gave space to help him work through his thoughts and feelings. You might have a lot of big feelings too, and that makes sense. You can come to me with your feelings and questions. This whole experience has been an opportunity to wrestle with my lack of control and practice tolerating discomfort, something I don't really love doing, and I'm guessing you guys might not love it either, but it's important work. I want my kids to know it's okay to have big feelings and tough questions. It's okay to be sad and confused and worried and even curious. I want them to go to the Lord with their thoughts and feelings, just like they can come to me. God is always with us, and he can handle whatever we're going through. When I can stay present with my big feelings or my kids' big feelings, I can show my kids that I am still me and I love you. You are still you and you're safe, and God is still God and he has us both. Those truths can give us courage to tolerate the discomfort, whatever awkwardness or sadness or anger or embarrassment, whatever challenging emotion is at play. Things in life can be really hard, but God is with us even then. He says in Isaiah 41:10, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand."
Thanks, Christina. We've watched you this last month as you've grieved this loss, and you guys, she's very real right now. She's done it with this much faith and grace and trust in the Lord, but also been really real, and it's just been amazing to witness. So thank you for your willingness to share that this morning. All right, well, we are going to switch gears now, and I have the privilege of welcoming our speakers onto the stage. So we have Rodney and Traci Wright with us this morning, and Rodney and Traci, they're passionate about helping individuals, couples, and families move toward health. They work for Pure Desire Ministries. Rodney and Traci share their personal journey of recovery and hope based on 30-plus years of experience as speakers, pastors, and counselors. They facilitate conversation through conferences and online formats for individuals, couples, and parents. They are authors of the book, How to Talk with Your Kids About Sex, and focus specifically on educating parents and communities on how to communicate healthy sexuality with our kids. They have 3 adult children, 2 grandkids, and currently live in the Pacific Northwest. Will you please help me welcome Rodney and Traci this morning?
Thank you. What a great introduction. Christina, thank you so much for sharing your story. You gave us all a gift, and you gave your kids a gift, and I feel that strongly today. So thank you for just showing up and being real and inviting all of us into the story. Well, I normally don't feel all this emotion when I come and present, but thank you for that gift.
I already feel emotion because I'm in a room of moms. So, been a mom, still a mom, now I'm a grandma. So two little ones. My daughter actually came to the September event, but they're over in Hillsboro, and she's got a brand new baby.
Turn her mic on, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I've never turned her on stage before, but so we'll jump into it. Oh, we are talking about sexuality, right? So, all right, just a little icebreaker, help us transition.
I brought Rodney today.
You guys got a sense of humor. You know, it's okay to laugh. How many know it's going to be okay to laugh today? All right, all right. You know what I'm talking about up there, Joanne, don't you? I know. I met Joanne first, and I thought, uh-oh, her and I should not be together. She's something else. She teaches junior high boys. So anyway, go ahead, Traci.
So we have a 2-year-old grandson and then a 1-month-old granddaughter. And I'm calling myself a nanny because I work at Pure Desire offices part of the week, but I'm also being over there with her. And it just brings back all those memories of watching her. And I know you guys aren't that far from it. Sometimes I forget, but there's some things I really actually never forget, right? You never forget those things. So just hold you in high esteem, moms. Single moms, moms that are well supported. I still know what it is to be a mom. And just what Christina shared today, it really goes along with what we're sharing. Even when Amy said we're switching gears, I was like, nope, we're not really switching gears. She's talking about safe spaces, and that's what you're going to hear us talk about today. We can give you nuts and bolts on how to do things, and we will do that, but we're also giving you just kind of good family systems things. So a safe space is really what we need to be able to have those conversations around sexuality. So you'll see in our topic, we're going to do a bit of a flyover because we normally do this in a couple hours. So you may have more questions. We brought our books there that we'll be selling, but also we're always open to you coming and asking us questions in any way that we can support you afterwards, okay? So just want to let you know, we're going to look at these 10 principles that we have.
There's handouts at your table there, so you're welcome
Okay.
to grab those handouts, and you can kind of follow along with us here. So just let me say a couple things as Traci started as well. It is such an honor for me and Traci for us to be here today, and just such a wonderful room of estrogen. I brought a couple friends to have some testosterone in the back, Trevor and Justin. But just to see the little kids that are here with their moms too, it's such a precious gift. So a couple things that I want to just say off the bat. We're going to use sexual language, and for some of us, because of our faith upbringing or even some maybe negative experiences in sexuality, hearing this language may be a little more triggering just because we're not used to hearing sexual language in a healthy context as much. And so today we may offer some new paradigms and ways of thinking. I just would encourage you to turn your brain on today. You don't have to agree with everything we say today. Take what works for you and go with it, and what doesn't, you can set it aside and just ponder. But I really want to hopefully offer you some new paradigms of thinking and seeing about healthy family systems and about just learning how to redeem the conversation of human sexuality. So again, we're just going to give you some big principles, and we'll start from there today.
This is a quote that we love. It's not about having the 100-minute conversation. It's more about the 100 one-minute conversations. So some of you might already be kind of on that page. I think there's a shift from the way that we grew up, or maybe our parents either never talked about it, or they would hand you a book when you're a preteen, read the book, ask me any questions. They're hoping you don't ask them any questions because that's going to be the end of the topic and you're never going to visit it again. So that's most people's experience, and we do a lot of parent conferences and we'll ask people kind of raise your hand or whatever, what your experience. Wish we had time to do that today of what was your experience growing up. But really to be able to share along the way, to be aware of those teachable moments, and to have the conversations as we go. Not that we don't ever have them when our kids are teenagers and take them away for a weekend and do special things like that, but we're missing it if we wait until that period of time and we're not aware. And so a lot of you probably have younger children, and even sometimes we'll have people that aren't parents yet, and they're like, well, we're not there yet, but you really are there. Yeah. Because even our first topic, and I'll start with just going through these 10, and then I'll talk about our first topic, but I'm just going to read quickly through so you'll know where we're headed. So one is pursue personal health, educate yourself, practice communication, foster connection, be ready at any time, welcome questions, train, not shame or punish, focus on growth, not perfection, keep modeling, and never turn away. So that's kind of where we're headed. Those are some of the big ideas that we're talking about today. But our first one is just personal health, pursuing personal health. So going back to that, no matter where you're at, like if your children are really little, they're not verbal yet, you're like, well, it's not time to teach them about boundaries and body parts quite yet. Pursuing personal health just turns the mirror around and helps us to face what we've been handed. And for some of us, we were handed some healthy things, or we maybe felt like we made healthy choices. For others, we may not. Sometimes we think, oh, I don't like how I handled that, but I really hope I can help my kids. So we kind of hop over sometimes our own healing to just be like, oh man, I hope they don't make the mistakes that I did. So we really like to start with just what were we handed, what were we given, and what are we going to do with that?
I love seeing some of you moms with your little kids actually here at this presentation, because you could say to them, you went through a whole presentation when you were like 1. I mean, you should have this down, right? You know, but how many of you had the one talk when you were 12 or 14 or something with your mom and dad? That's how it happened for you? Okay. How many of you were just given the book when you were 12 or 14 and say, read this? Okay. How many just had silence and not a lot of communication at all? Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, there we are. Yeah. So let me talk to you a little bit about focusing on personal health. First of all, just to redeem this conversation is that we're made in God's image and we're good. What God made, he said, was very good. And normally I start our talk sometimes by saying when God, the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit created Adam, they stepped back. And in unison, they all said this: hey, we can do better than that. That's a joke, right? Some theologians believe that had women been created first, us men would have never been created. God would have said, you know what, I think we're going to stop right here. This is about as best as it gets, right? Any woman power in the room here, ladies? Come on, I'm giving you some love this morning already. Do you feel it, right? So I want you to know that God made male and female image bearers of God. So if you want to know what God may look like, just look at the woman next to you right now. Go ahead and do it, would you? She is an image bearer of the divine. Can anyone say amen to that? No. Right? And that's what I love so much about the teachings of Jesus, is Jesus was always elevating the worth and value of women in a culture where they were less than. And I love when women get in leadership. Pastor Perry, thank you for using your leadership gift and creating such a wonderful space to help gals connect and heal there. But God gave us our human sexuality for 3 reasons. For bonding. This is the beautiful part about marriage, the bond that you have with a special person unlike any other. The ability to create children. And it looks like you guys are doing tremendous in that realm here, by the way. That's fantastic. But the third area is for pleasure, right? God gave us strategic nerve endings, I like to say. Yay, way to go, God. The ability to feel orgasm, the ability to feel pleasure, the nerve endings in the head of the penis or the clitoris. God did that by design. It wasn't like a mistake from the fall or something. Like, God did that. And that sense of bonding, that sense of pleasure, that deep connection with God in his presence is fullness of joy, David says, and at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. They created us in their image. They exist in great joy and pleasure. They exist in bond, and they exist in creation, and now we get to participate in that. So from a start, if you can help your kid just understand this, that sex is good and their body is good. There's nothing evil about the elbow or the finger or the genitals. They're actually good parts of the body, and they have wonderful purpose. But sometimes, how many know we have a good part of us that gets in a wrong role or gets hurt in a wrong way? And so this is when I would just help us look at maybe a negative sexual history as now an adult, a young parent or someone moving into adulthood. What is my negative sexual history that I don't see my sexuality as good because of sin, because of the damage that has happened in culture or my family system? So we think about trauma maybe that's happened to us. Statistics would say, and you don't have to raise your hand, but abuse has happened to some of us in this room, and so that's very traumatic. Maybe addiction was a part of my story growing up. Abortion, abuse, or just silence about this subject. So in silence in our family systems, the silence says something to us. It's not okay or good to talk about this. This is evil until you get married, then it turns really good, supposedly. So that history is so important. This next slide I want to talk through here was really helpful for me. So in my story, just you can read it in the book, but addiction was a part of my journey growing up in faith. And so it was in my 20s that I went to a therapist and said, I love God, I'm sincere in my faith, I'm trying to be as honest as I can, but I keep having a problem with pornography and sexuality. And so my therapist took me through this whole piece about holistic spirituality. And if you could see these pie charts on the back of that, or on the part of that page that you have there, just seeing health holistically, I thought what it meant to be a Christian, if these were the different components of our life, I thought that our spiritual life looked like this. The next slide. Our spiritual life was when we did spiritual things, like attend mom-to-moms groups on Thursdays, the most spiritual day of the week, right? Even more spiritual than Sundays, right? The moms group. Or when I read my Bible or prayed, that was the spiritual part of Rodney. And I thought that the goal of the Christian faith was how many times I could show up to the local church building. And the more I did, the more spiritual that I was, or the more that I prayed or read my scriptures. I was doing all of this. I was even confessing my struggles. So this wasn't something that I was grateful I got away with. This was something where I didn't know how to integrate the way of my faith in my sexuality or some of the traumas that happened to me as a young boy. I didn't know how to, Christina, grieve some of the painful experiences like you did so beautifully with your children and just with your story. You gave yourself permission to grieve something. So my therapist that I went to, I went in on Tuesday hoping to be fixed by Friday so I look good on Sunday. How many can relate to that, right? I wanted that quick Jesus fix, that quick magic, right? And he said, in a couple years, you're going to get this. But the next slide is how he showed me about my spirituality. That spirituality is about integrating the way of Jesus in all areas of your life. Not just hyper-focusing on some, but learning how to grieve. And I have realized that grief is some of the hardest work we do. And so grief is difficult to do, but healthy people grieve. And we just know you got to feel to heal. And many times in our addictive behaviors, whatever it can be, our coping mechanisms, we can cope with something because we don't know how to process certain things, traumas that happen, or losses that happen in our lives. So one of the best gifts I would say to give to yourself is, if you're stuck, if you have a secret that if somebody found out, it would just be the end of the world in your mind, or there's something that has ensnared you, love yourself enough to go get help and to see that you're worthy of love and you're worthy of care. This is a quote that I really believe in. Healthy people seek help, and seeking help is not a sign of our weakness, it's a sign of our wisdom. So if you're here in the mom-to-mom group and you have a problem and you're stuck and you were to seek some outside help, Pastor Perry, how would we feel if somebody would seek help with a problem here? Amy, how would you and the leadership team feel if somebody sought help with a problem? Okay, great, bring it on. So I want you to just have a paradigm switch that coming to a church building isn't about looking good. It's about being real, and it's about finding people and resources that God would lead you to find healing in that aspect of your life. So for me, how I perceived my Christian faith, how I perceived it, wasn't bringing transformation to me, and I had to be honest enough to admit that. And so that led me to a paradigm shift about learning how to integrate the way of Jesus. So I'm going to land the plane on this right here, and we're going to move on to the next one. But I just want to say, I give you permission, if you need it from someone, to seek some outside help. If you or you and your spouse are stuck in any way of your history that you haven't been able to process well, it's okay. You're worthy of love. And in fact, I would just say this. When we shared my story with our kids as they were growing up, my daughter, it was at Christmas Eve one time, and they were old enough, we thought, to share. But my daughter, Whitney, who's the oldest, said this to me when I shared my story of addiction and counseling. She said this, "Dad, I'm so glad you loved yourself enough to go get help and you saw your worth and value." That's what my daughter said to me. And I was just like, who's your parents? You're pretty amazing to say that, right? Isn't that great that she grew up with a paradigm that if you love yourself well and you're stuck somewhere, that go getting help is actually a sign of not your weaknesses, but your strength. I need help. I'm not doing well. So I don't know who needs that today, but I know someone does. So the first gift you're going to give your kids in this arena of sexuality is, hey, I've got some negative history I need to process. Where would be some safe people and places to do that? Yay, Pure Desire, right? Here it is, Pure Desire. There's a lot of ministries and resources that can help you if you get unstuck in that regard.
And really, wherever you're at, having a growth mindset. So I hope that's something we still have. I think our family has adopted that growth mindset. It's okay. We're going to go through bumps and bruises along the way, and it looks different in every season of life. We've gone through them in different seasons. Now we have a little bit of hindsight, right, to look back and say there were seasons where it was a little more calm, seasons where there were bumps, and continue to be. And so having that growth mindset, and then really just accepting our story and, taking a look at it so that we can pass something good on to our kids. So we really love this quote here too by Brene Brown, if any of you are familiar with her. When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write a brave new ending. So whatever your story, you get to write a brave new ending. And you have people around you, hopefully authentic people, safe people that you can share your story with and keep healing.
Yeah, don't believe the lie that sometimes shames or our trauma gives, that you don't deserve getting help, because you really, really do. And I hope that my story is testimony, and Traci's story is testimony of that. So let's move on. Your health is the best gift you give your kids. So if you're married, you and your spouse, move toward health. That's the best gift you're going to give them to start.
Our second principle is educate yourself. So once you've taken a look within, then educating ourselves ahead of time, right? Because as a lot of you probably have said, I've heard many leaders say, it's an uncomfortable topic. For some people, it's like, how am I going to answer these questions? I don't know. I don't even know what to say or when to say it. I want to protect my kids, and how much is too much. So educating yourself is a really good baseline, and we're kind of talking about giving you a scaffolding here, of a building. So we're looking at foundational things, and educating yourself first is a really important part of that.
One of the things we would say is get our book or a book like ours, and you and your spouse read a chapter out loud to each other, so you're used to hearing and talking about sexual languages with each other. Sometimes even in marriage, we're not used to talking about sexuality. So maybe we weren't in a home system where we heard that talked about. But I think there's three primary areas that we can get educated about our human sexuality: our families, our faith, and our culture. And I think all of these can be positive or negative, right? And there's a lot of different aspects with that, but I think they can be positive or negative, either one. But I think the primary educator that, as I look in Scripture and as I just begin to take a step back and say, whose responsibility is it to educate us about human sexuality? I think really it's the parents' primary responsibility to be educators of our kids and modeling in healthy ways, and then giving a healthy framework for our kids to learn and grow about this. This was the framework my dad gave me. This was my talk when I was 17. We were at a bar stool like this at our kitchen bar. My dad was a minister. He came home from actually dismissing a pastor who had a moral failure. And my dad said to my brother and I, sons, boys, there are three things that will destroy you in this world: girls, glory, and gold. Stay away. That was my sex education talk, right, from my dad. It was the 3G sermon, right, because, he was a pastor in the 70s, and so he gave us this little talk. And so I looked at my brother and I said, well, that kind of clarifies it all for me. How about you, But I'm just saying, my dad never had any framework. He just knew when sexuality goes wrong, it can be really hurtful and destructive. And that's what he was trying to tell us. But we never had any framework just to understand or see. So many times our sex educator then becomes culture. And it sure was for me. And this is a passion I have. I would say the church, we cannot let pornography be the sex educator of our kids any longer. We can do better. Can somebody say amen with me, right? So you understand religious amen language. Okay, so because I just would say, man, we got to do better about giving some framework to help mom and dads know how to pass on something different. And so families, faith, and culture. And sometimes faith have been a negative and positive. I think this is a very positive experience. Hopefully it will be for all of you, but that we're at least pushing the subject forward by doing some education about how would we, what would be a framework to begin these conversations? What would be some language to say it? But sometimes faith can be negative if it takes a purity culture in the sense of hands off, that sex is somehow bad or taboo, or that your body is bad or taboo. And sometimes we get confused about the word flesh in Scripture, thinking that it's our physical body rather than a nature that's been touched by sin. And so sometimes it gets confusing in the minds of kids, or as kids are growing and developing in the faith culture, about what's normal sexual development, right? I had a mom come home the other day, and her junior high boy came home from school. And he says to his mom, "Mom, I have had an erection all day at school. This puberty thing is driving me crazy. I'm going to go upstairs and lay down and hope it goes away. So that's what this junior high boy said to his mom. The mom calls me because they're good family friends. Rod, what do I do? I'm on the floor laughing first, saying, well, you've already done it. You've provided a safe place, given him healthy language to talk about normal adolescent development. And now he's learning how to manage this in healthy ways. Way to go, Mom. She's like, I do not feel like the hero here, Rod. She's like, I do not feel like the hero here. And I said, you're allowing a conversation to happen as a young man is learning to understand his sexuality and become a steward of it. We're going to talk about that. And culture, again, culture can be positive or negative. I say positive because in our town in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, one of the elementary schools that is part of the community, not a faith-based school, asked me to come and talk with the 5th grade dads and boys about puberty. And I'm like, all day long. I mean, that's a great thing, right? When we as the church cannot just say that's awful, but we can get our voice and become a voice that can educate and help give people good resources.
And I think also outside of our faith communities,
Yeah.
we think sometimes us against them, but there are so many people in our broken world that they really do want their kids to have healthy relationships. They really do want the kids in the school to have healthy relationships and healthy views on sexuality. So when we can find that and link arms, rather than kind of thinking, it keeps it separated. And sometimes that's what the pornography industry does, is like, oh, healthy sexuality, that's just a Christian thing, that's a faith thing, right? And they want to separate that out, and like you're oppressing people. I think when we link arms with our medical community, with our school communities, the best that we can, right? To say what we're all wanting is healthy relationships for our kids.
And let's move on, but I want you to write this down somewhere so you get it in your mind. Sex is good and sex is from God. And that's what I want you to, as a premise, when you educate your kid, their body is good, that sexuality is good, and this is a gift from God, okay?
We have a scripture on there. I'm not going to read the whole scripture, but just a couple things that we highlighted. You can read that later. But I love the Message version of this. Sex is as much spiritual mystery as physical fact. We must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever, the kind of sex that can never become one. The physical part of you is not some piece of property belonging to the spiritual part of you. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced, fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. And marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. This passage of scripture is just a great one to take a look of, just about healthy sexuality and God's view on that. And I just love how they paraphrase it. But I'm going to move us on to practice communication. That's our next one, if I can get to it. Practice communication. Okay, so Rodney always has me read these lovely words because I am.
It's my favorite part in our presentation.
I'm the least comfortable with using sexual terms or just body part terms because I didn't grow up. I had one sister. It was a thingy, and we just didn't talk about anything. So I didn't really have words for it until I was an adult, and I'm pretty sure I never said masturbation until a couple years ago. So.
Did she just say thingy?
Breast, I'm not allowed to say that anymore.
Oh my goodness, Traci.
Breast, penis, vagina, testicles, intercourse, orgasm, wet dream, masturbation, menstrual cycle, arousal, oral sex, ejaculation. Growing up, were these words talked about in your home in a healthy way? That's a nice rhetorical question, huh? Now, I know that the culture...
Oh, I see hands everywhere. Yes.
The culture we live in now is so overexposed that probably for you that maybe doesn't even make sense. Like if you're quite a bit younger than me, which most of you are, that might not make sense because really a lot of these words are now just out there and we know about them and we're not learning about them as later in life. So that's one of the reasons why even the communication with our kids at a young age, because younger and younger they're being exposed. So a lot of moms feel that like I'm trying to protect my little one, their ears and their eyes, and as we should, but we're not really able to in our culture.
Yeah.
We were walking a few months ago in our neighborhood, and the older kids are walking home from school with the younger kids, and they're shouting out all kinds of expletives and all kinds of sexual things, and you're just standing there like, oh, these little grade schoolers are hearing far more they're exposed to, and this isn't coming from their home. It's just being in culture.
Joanne and I were even talking about this where we were getting our mics set up here today, but we live in a culture that sexualizes everything. Emojis, fruit, even certain words get hijacked and sexualized. And so in your home, the more you can normalize sexual language and not see it as demonized, not as evil, but just sexual. Does that make sense? This is just sexual language. It does feel uncomfortable. Was anybody uncomfortable besides Traci when she read all those words, right? When you heard those words? Yeah, some of you were like, oh my goodness, these guys aren't even Christians. You know what I mean? Like, just unsure. Because they said that in the house of the Lord. You know, how could this even be? This house has been defiled. We got to purify it, right? Because we're not used to hearing sexual language in a healthy context. Are you with me? Right? You know, so what we're trying to help you do is to see not all sexuality, it can get distorted. And if it's been that way for you in your life, I'm so sorry. But we're going to try to redeem the language so that we can give our kids healthy understanding about that. So when they're learning about their body parts, penis, vagina, they have normal practical words to express. And in our book, we talk about a whole bunch of different series that you can get that are age appropriate for kids. In our book, we also write about at what age they need to get what level of learning. We can't unpack all of that here today, but there are some books that you can sit down with your kid. So I'm an advocate that kids should see nudity, the male and female body, not when exposed to pornography in a sexualized way, but maybe while sitting on the lap or next to mom and dad in a book that just explains how God made our body. And there's some wonderful kids books like 2 to 4 you can just read, and we're going to grandma's and she makes pies and here's the color of balloons. And this is how God made boys' bodies, right? Boys have penises. They're on the outside and testicles. That's the right place for them. And boy, turn the page. You're just like daddy. And this is how God made girls. Their parts are on the inside. Well, at least the lower parts are. You know, and it just describes that and it gives the proper language. And then when we're done with grandma's, we're going to the movie, right? It's just a book so kids can see that, oh, I'm like daddy, the boy would say, or, oh, I'm like mommy, but they understand the parts of the body, but they don't see it in a hypersexualized way. Are you with me on this? This is so helpful that you help them see that and understand that and give them the proper language to call that. And so,
right, and
to
remembering
speak to
that they don't have sexualized minds when they're little, so even if they say something like that, and some people are worried about teachers, probably younger generation knows that the teachers hear all kinds of, if you are a teacher, you know, you hear all kinds of stuff, so not to worry about that. And it's good to have conversation about this is what we talk about at home versus you don't have to share this with everybody at school, this is for our family to talk about.
I'll never forget when I was raking the leaves in the backyard one fall, and our daughter Whitney was about 12 or 13, and she opens the slider door and yells this from the back. Hey, Mom, I started my period today. Like it was like the ice cream truck loud. I mean, the whole neighborhood was hearing this, and I was just like, man, do we throw a party? I felt awkward, but she was so comfortable just saying, hey, I'm continuing to change, and I'm moving through puberty, and this just started, but zero shame to talk about that subject in front of mom and dad. So the more you can make your table or your home the safe place to have the healthy sexual language, you're already bridging that gap. And when your kids are young, you can practice before they understand anything. You know, you can like practice, right? You can say, oh,
talk
you
to
want
them
more
when they don't know what you're saying, and you
right.
can share all those practice and all. I like that. That's a good idea.
You can practice the language in that regard. So language is really important, and if this creates a lot of shame for you, that may be another good indicator. Hey, move towards some healing work in this area so that this can be redeemed and you can begin to pass on something healthy.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
And a main takeaway would be talk to someone about it, practice it, right? So you're ready for that. So if it's your spouse, if it's your small group, if you're a single parent, however, you know, safe people around you to be able to talk and get comfortable with it, right? Because once we're more comfortable with it, it's a lot easier because the questions aren't like here. We're going to show you the 3 questions you're going to be asked, and here's the answer to it. Every kid's a little bit different. Every home's a little different in how that looks. So get comfortable with it if you need your own book to go through and take a look.
Educate yourself.
The next principle is foster connection.
This is a huge principle for us in the book because we find that our greatest human need isn't orgasm or sexuality. Our greatest human need is intimacy. And this is a lie that culture feeds us, is that we have to be sexual to be intimate. And I would say it's a lie. It's not true. Our greatest need is to know and be known, to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. We were made for intimate relationships. And if you have been manipulated in a relationship to think somehow you have to be sexual to be intimate, I'm really sorry for that. But the reality is we're all made to connect deeply. So what Christina did with her kids to say, Mommy's sad because this, she's modeling intimacy. She's showing appropriate vulnerability that, yeah, things in life hurt. And when they hurt, we grieve them. And our grief isn't what's wrong with us, it's what's right with us. It's the appropriate emotional response to loss that happens in our life. So our kids' greatest need is that connection with your kid. Connect with their heart. For me, I just can say I didn't always get this when my kids were young. I did not get this. Once I found sobriety in my sexuality, unfortunately, I just swapped addictions, and I became a pastor with a disease called workaholic. You know what I'm talking about? Like my father was. So I gave 80 hours to the church, was a super pastor, but I came home with nothing in the emotional bank for my kids. You understand that? And my kids would say, Keaton, our youngest, would say, Dad, let's go outside and play catch. And I would say, Keaton, I'm bushed. And back in those days when he was just a little guy, we had stuff that they delivered on your front porch. It was called a newspaper. I don't know if you've ever seen them or heard about them in the past. It was long before this, but you would actually fold them and they had print written on them and you would read them. And I would just say, hey, I need some time, I'm bushed. And I would want to decompress by reading the paper. And so one time we were on vacation and Traci was telling our dating story and she was just saying, you know, your dad wasn't sure if we should date or he wanted to break up and he was so uncertain. And little Keaton just from the back seat said, oh, Mom, Dad loved you. He was just bushed, you know? And when he said that, it was like funny and it was not funny. Because I thought, this is what my young kid's picking up from me. Dad helps everybody in the world, but when he comes home, he's got nothing left in the tank for us. He's bushed, right? And I realized, it took me a long time to realize that our greatest need is connection, not just busyness, right? And so the greatest responsibility is to deeply connect with those that bear our last name, that are made in our image, that live in our home. And so showing up and connecting is so crucial with your kids that you can feel together, you can laugh together, you can experience together, and sharing those emotions and a vulnerability is a big piece of that.
Yeah, I think as a culture, we're growing in that. Have you seen the little face emojis? I love those. Like, you can actually put on your fridge, do it with your kids, right? Where it's got the little face. Actually, my grandson has a placemat with that. So we sit there like, what's grumpy look like? What's happy look like? But being able to connect deeper and, you know, being intentional, really. It takes being intentional because we know what life is like, right? Life is very busy and it's very hard to sit down and think about it and be intentional.
Because the goal in marriage isn't just to have an outlet for your sexuality. The goal in marriage is to grow in deeper intimacy, right? And so this is where sexuality just becomes another piece of the puzzle in marriage to continue that. But how many know you can be sexual but not be intimate? And that's that goal, is learning how to be intimate in your marriage relationship. Okay?
Our next principle is be ready at any time. Oh, I need to go past that one. Be ready at any time. So this really, again, is about intentionality. The Jewish Shema in Deuteronomy, I think this is kind of the old-fashioned way of saying kind of what we would think now. These commandments I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. So I just think of this as like, this is being intentional. This is being ready to have those conversations, whether they be around sexuality or other healthy conversations. So when we're riding in a car, that's a great time because if your kids get older, you'll understand this. You're facing forward, so it's a little, it's a little easier to have conversation than just staring at each other, right? Little less uncomfortable. But when you're watching something on television, like how many times does something come on and we can just pause it and say, hey, what did you think about how that person treated the other person, right? Yeah. Or what do your friends say about this kind of scenario that we just saw?
I want to tell you a story a little bit about that, but before I do, go back to real quick to practice communication. I want to share these principles because I think they're really, really important. 2 healthy terms I want to give you when it comes to explaining sexuality. Healthy versus unhealthy. That's good language in my opinion to use. And manage and mismanage, right? If I could offer one thing, it's just not to Christianize everything. Son, we want you to grow up and have Christian sex someday, right? and you eat Christian tacos and drive Christian cars. You understand what I'm saying? But it's saying, son, we want you to realize you're a sexual being, and we want you to manage this part of your life in healthy ways. We'd say to our daughter, this part can be managed or mismanaged. It can be seen in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. I would just propose that that's better language to help your kids with, rather than trying to feel like you have to spiritualize it, or, we want you to do biblical sexuality, right? So I just want to throw that out there for you to consider, and you and your spouse can talk about if that's good language for you. What's healthy or unhealthy about this? Traci and I are driving in the car, coming home from the Oregon coast years ago when we lived in Portland, and our little 5-year-old boy is sitting in the back seat. I don't even know if he was in a car seat at that point or not, but we had grace.
That's a newer thing.
Yeah, that's a newer thing. Yeah, I guess we're that old. But anyway, he leans up and asks me this question. Hey, Dad, is it true that babies come out of mom's vagina? Little boy Austin says that, right? Sitting next to his sister a year older. So now the word vagina is bouncing off the red minivan. Traci's sound asleep. She's woke up, and it looks like someone put a banana in my face and turned it sideways. I'm just like, oh, it's on right now. We are having this conversation in the van, right? And so I'm looking through the rearview mirror, and I say to my son Austin, yep, that's how God made it. When moms have babies, they come through this birth canal. And that's exactly how God made it. It's beautiful and it's painful, but it's an amazing thing. His sister sitting next to him hits him on the arm and says, see, I told you, Austin, right? Because mom had educated her at one point, and she's just passing on the information to him. And then I say to my son, Austin, it's such a beautiful thing when you guys were born. It's an amazing miracle. But when moms have babies, it's very, very painful. And I'm personally glad that God made me a boy, because I don't want to have to experience all that pain. And his eyes got really big as saucers, and he said, me too, Dad. And then he looked at his sister and said, sorry about that, Whitney. Like someday you're going to have all this pain. I'm so sorry. He's already exercising his compassion gift.
At least he was empathetic, right?
Right, toward his sister. But I just thought, now where is it a safe place for a young boy to ask that question? Who should he ask that question with? Right? Where's a safe place to talk about how babies are born and the birth canal and all those aspects? So again, this is about creating a safe place when questions are asked, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here right after our break. But a safe place where these conversations could happen at any place, at any time, and so this is just about being ready, so that we can help with a 1-minute conversation. Right? I have a sister that's a labor and delivery nurse, and I could say, hang on, let's get Aunt Star on the phone. She's gonna really lay this out for you, buddy. He's 5, right? Birth canal was good language for him, right? It wasn't the stork, it was a birth canal, and he'll learn more about that as he gets older, right? So anyway, this is the aspect of looking for teachable moments that can happen, not just about sexuality, but when you become a safe family system, you can talk about all kinds of things. I remember with my son, he came home and learned a new profane word. It was the word bitch, and so he's using this word, and I said, hey, buddy, come sit down right here, this junior high boy, and we talked about language and about profane language and how profanity can be the lowest form of communication, and sometimes it just describes something, but many times, most of the time, it's misused, and it's used derogatory to hurt people. It's not just profane, it's used in a curse way. And so I went through, you don't have to do this, but I went through every cuss word I could ever think of that I've heard, and I shared it with my kid. I know some of you are like, wow, I can't believe Rod's even on stage. But I said to them, here's how that word gets misused. And this is why you would never say this about someone. Because now you're taking a profane language and you're using it to curse someone, or you're demeaning someone. And when you hear language on the playground, I want you to have a healthy context for this. This is unhealthy ways to use this language. Are you with me on that? Right? So you're trying to educate. You're a safe place. When I said that word as a young boy, or a word similar, my mom got a bar of soap. Does any of you remember those days? And she washed the devil right out of my mouth, right? I remember that, seriously. And it was like a whoa. So I thought, whatever you do, this wasn't about learning or training Rodney. This was about, that's bad, stop it, don't do that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move on. But just think about that. There's teachable moments all the time. If you can begin to just have a better framework, you can begin to move through that.
Yeah, and we're trying to help you be aware and give you some principles for being ready, but the truth is we're not going to be ready every time. So for you perfectionists, recovering perfectionists in the room, that's difficult sometimes. A couple trainers this last month, I have heard them use the term good enough parenting. And I was like, I think we all need a dose of that, because there's a lot of this, I've got to do this perfectly or I'm going to screw up my kids, you know? And then we joke about they're going to need therapy because of me, right? Well, the truth is, none of us do this perfectly. Rodney and I have not been ready every time. There is not a person in this room that's going to be ready every time. So we're preparing, we're putting those things in place. We're getting it right sometimes. When we don't get it right, we're going back to our kids, which we've done. We've done at all stages, all the way up to
Yeah.
adulthood. Here's the things we wish we would have done differently. If someone's asking you a question and you're not ready for it, you give them the best answer you can. Kind of give them a short answer when you don't know what you're talking about. You can always come back later and come around to it. But just want to lift that off your shoulders. I've been asking a lot of women that I counsel lately, what does good enough parenting or good enough this and that in their life look like, because of the pressure that we put on ourselves. So please hear that in this big world of parenting and just living our lives, right? We need a little bit of that. So,
The mind can only take what the bladder can endure. At this point, we're going to give you a 10-minute break. I've been instructed. So if you need to use the bathroom, pump, get some dessert, whatever you got to do as a mom, you got permission to do it. And then we're going to come back in 10 minutes. So thank you very much. I'm going to keep us moving. To be done at 11. Yeah. I'm going to keep
second
us.
half, he's like, let's
I'm going
go.
to check. I'm going to keep us moving on, just because I know our time frame here, and I want to just kind of keep the conversation going. Get your snack and grab your coffee. But I want you to just understand that this book, this concept that we're really teaching, is building blocks. And if you're comfortable with language and communication and welcoming questions and are being ready anytime, then you can have short moments of time where you can interject truth and give guidance. One of the things I realize because of my own story as a kid, being raised as a pastor's son, navigating pornography, not having a healthy framework, not feeling safe to ask anybody any questions in my home, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It was kind of scary. When my kids ask a question, I felt obligated to tell them everything I knew about sexuality that was healthy, right? So my son Keaton would say this: whatever you do, when his friends would come over, whatever you do, don't ask my dad about puberty. Don't ask him the question. He won't stop talking. Don't ask my dad, right? Because I felt obligated. I know some information I didn't know when I was their age, and I just want to give them all the information at once. So remember this process about being ready anytime. It's a part about you're building these 1-minute conversations. And in those 1-minute conversations, if you can always start with, hey, this is what's good about how God made you and how God made sexuality. Start with the framework about what's good, and then if you see what's unhealthy, you can talk about that now compared to why this is the better way, right? And so one of the things that we didn't show here today, but just how pornography affects the brain for our kids. And so this is really important when we talk about the brain health, and the brain science is actually affirming what Scripture teaches about being transformed in the renewing of your mind. It's the biblical term for repentance, changing how you think is the word metanoia in the Greek. So sometimes when we don't know how to process life well, and we're exposed to pornography, then the pornography floods our brain with dopamine, and it helps us then not think about the damaging part of our life, and then this becomes something that is addicted. And sometimes, because we don't process some of the painful experiences, we can believe the lie that the painful experience that we took away from it. And that's part of the sin's deceitfulness, right? We get hurt and wounded, and there's a lie we believe. And Jesus came to show us the truth about ourselves and that we're worthy of love, and show us how to follow him and live our lives in healthy ways. So I just would say that to think about, these are building blocks on that information to share with your kids.
Along that line, if you haven't heard of the resource, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, that's an excellent book. You can probably find it at library if the kids are in school, but really good for helping them understand like how pictures affect their brain. So from that perspective, a very well-known book.
Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Good Pictures, Bad
Yeah,
Pictures.
in fact, she was just on our podcast a while back, the gal at the Pure Desire podcast. Really, really great. Instead of saying, don't do that, that's bad, you can now begin to explain, or God doesn't want you to do that. You can talk about what's unhealthy about that versus what's a healthier way to do that. So again, that's where language can kind of help you on that. So let's move on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about welcome questions, and we have just a couple kind of groundwork things of ways to do this. Of course, some of you may have funny stories already of questions your kids have asked you, and maybe even around the table you'll get the chance to share that, because we hear when we're doing parent training some really funny things that kids ask, right? So they don't know, and they just hear something, or they just have something pop into their head, and they ask in a lot of funny ways. A lot of where babies are come from, that seems like the most typical one that they want to know. Like, where did the babies come from? And, stork is the easiest answer, but not the most truthful. So, welcome questions, affirm your child for asking. So start first by letting them know it was okay to ask the question. That's really important. That they're going to catch your nonverbals too, right? Was it okay for me to ask this question? So no matter what it was, just affirming that they were willing to be able to ask you the question.
How many are afraid they might ask questions before they leave your home? Like, I hope we can raise them and they ask no sexual questions. That's the father's role, right? I mean, or whatever, right? I mean, I was kind of afraid, knowing I had some negative history, how am I going to navigate this, right? So that question is like, oh my goodness, what do I say? And that's where the work I've done on my own health has really brought some really good help for me to realize age appropriate, and they don't need to know everything in order for us to be real and transparent. Does that make sense? What I share at 7 is different than what I share at 27 with them. So understanding this is really key.
And if you have multiple children, you know that they're each unique. So you might have one that asks a million questions, the other asks no questions. Don't assume the one not asking questions doesn't have any. Sometimes you can have if they're close enough in age, you can answer a question in front of the more quiet one, right? But not assuming that and being like, oh good, we made it to 18 and they didn't ask any questions. I know I've been guilty of that before.
Right.
But to be able to then intentionally, how do I welcome questions so they know that it's okay to ask? The second one is just repeating back to them. So repeat back to them what you think you heard, right? So you understand what's actually the question, what are they actually saying. Rodney says this also buys you 30 seconds to think of what your answer is going to be. Like, so if you're like, I have no idea how to answer this, well, what do you think about that, right? It buys you a little bit of time. Then we have a funny story about one of our kids coming home from grade school, maybe first grade, and saying, Mom, you'll never guess what a president did. It was right when Clinton and Monica Lewinsky were all over the internet or whatever we had back then.
They were in the newspaper.
Yeah. So, everybody was talking about that.
Their
I'm like,
sexual scandal, right?
I'm thinking, what did somebody tell them about oral sex at school? And how am I going to explain this to my first grader? And I'm like, well, what did you hear, honey? And he said, he cut down his father's cherry tree. He was talking about George Washington. I'm like, I am really glad that this was the George Washington day.
How many think clarity is important, right? I mean, just make sure that you answer the question they're asking,
so
right?
Funny, yeah. Like, I mean, it's a good example. I probably wouldn't have gone all the way there and explaining everything, but it's a good example. It happens all the time that really they just heard something or they just need a small piece of information. One of the friends that we have that works with us or teaches with us, she shared about her daughter asking her questions. She welcomed the question. She answered part of it from her history. And then her little daughter asked her another question. And she said, I'm so glad you asked. That's something I'd love to talk to you about, but not right now. We'll pick back up on that conversation. So I love that. She didn't want to give her too much information, but she gave her enough to let her know at an age-appropriate level this was okay for you to ask. And she opened the door to we're going to have future conversations all the way while you're growing up.
And so this is really important that you welcome questions. I want to share a story when I didn't welcome a question, and this is a mistake I made. I wrote a few of my mistakes in our book so that you wouldn't have to make all of them. So I paid the dumb tax on some of these, so please learn from me. I was camping with my two boys, maybe 10 and 7. We were up at Farragut State Park in Idaho where we lived, and we were camping. We had a tent set up. We had a fire built. We were cooking homemade chili that we opened out of a can and put in a pot, and we're making this chili, flashlights. And one of my kids says to me, hey, Dad, have you ever looked at porn? Now, how many think that's a great question for a son to ask their dad? I'm going to wait. If you think that's a good question, okay. All right. So I think it's a safe place to ask, right? Like again, going back, the home should be the safe place to ask, right? And Rodney, Wright, I'm the author of the book with my wife, Traci, How to Talk with Your Kids About Sex, right? So, I've got a lot of information here. And they asked me, hey, Dad, have you ever saw porn? So you know what this expert said with their boys? I simply said, hey, who wants more chili? I changed the subject so quick they didn't even see it coming, right? Just boom, took them on a different direction. And the reason why is because I had sobriety from my behavior at that time, but I still had shame connected to who I was as an individual. I hadn't healed from the shame. And this brings me right back to point 1, pursue your own health. This isn't just about I don't do that anymore, but I've learned to heal this part of my life and integrate this as a part of my story. Now, I didn't need to go into all the details of that, but what I could have given them a much healthier framework by simply saying, yes, when I was young, I did see pornography. It was different than your guys' world because mine was chiseled on a rock. We're old, We didn't have these devices, kind of thing. But, and when you see it, and when I saw it, I didn't feel safe to talk to my dad. And when you see it, I want you to know you can come talk to your dad, because this stuff can really hurt your brain, and it can really mess up relationships, and it can hurt people that you love very, very much. And I could have given them 1,000 different ways to frame that would have been much healthier. Now, when my boys bring that up, they don't even remember asking that question. But guess who does? I do, right? And so I did not create a safe place by welcoming the question. I changed the subject because of some of that shame. And so this is what I'm saying. Your health in this process is so important. Just so even if you say, yes, I have, and we're going to talk more about that later. The chili's burning, and then circle back around. But I circled back around and said to the boys, hey, I missed it on that one. And that one's on me. And I wish I would have built a safer place so when you were exposed, you knew that Dad was the safe person, because I'm showing that vulnerability in my story.
So moving on with that, answering a question with a question. So if you can ask a question back to them, responding positively. So sometimes we are about the don'ts, right? We're telling them like what not to do. If you can kind of reframe that to say what's positive, and Rodney's talked a few times about that, what's positive or what we're for, like we're for healthy relationships, we're for safety, that helps rather than starting with the negatives in it. Educating correctly, so that comes back to, right, educating yourself so that I can as far as I am able to, right? We're all just going to do the best with what we have. But to be able to educate correctly and age appropriately. Keep the dialogue going, so that's about creating that safe space so they would be comfortable coming back and asking questions again, and then expecting more questions. So when we do create that environment, expect that it's not going to be that one-time thing. It's going to wrap back around, hopefully, to more questions. And I think often when our kids are at that young stage is a really great time to welcome those questions and start having the conversations, because they're little sponges, right? Everything their parents do, they're listening hard. They think you're the coolest person, right? My little boy one time said, let's ask my mom, to my mom he said this, let's ask my mom, she's a genius. And so my mom was cracking up and had to tell me, he thinks you're a genius. And I was like, he didn't think I was a genius all the way through life, but he might come back to that now. But they are the little sponges. They're listening so hard to what you have to say and taking in what their parents are saying. As they get a little older, we know they shift to peers, right? So it doesn't mean you lose that with them. It doesn't mean they don't still respect you, but they do shift to what their peers are thinking. So that's just, if you can think of that mindset, when they get older, when they're junior high, when they're high school, we want to just be like, I call it staying in the car, right? I'm not in the driver's seat. I might not even be in the passenger seat anymore, but at least I'm in the car. Maybe I'm still in the back seat and they're still listening to what I have.
Maybe you're locked in the trunk, but you're still in the car.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes
You still got a
that's true
voice.
thing. Yeah, you still have a
Slow
voice
down.
with your kids. So I think it shifts from that, right? To if any of you have young adults or teenagers, you know that it shifts from being that one voice to multiple voices in their life. And culture is a voice, so staying in that safe place.
Yeah, good. Number 7, train, not shame or punish. So this is where in the book where we talk about consequences. There are natural consequences with our decisions, helping our kids realize that certain behaviors have consequences, and we unpack that. But I want to just talk a little bit about discipleship or discipline, or training versus shaming or punishing. And this kind of goes back to with a story of me when I was a young boy. I was raised in the Central Valley of California, a town called Modesto, in the San Joaquin Valley, south of Sacramento. And my father was a local minister there. He pastored of a church of about 1,000 in the 70s. So it was like, he was kind of a big deal in a lot of our minds. And I like to say my dad was a cross between Billy Graham, Ronald Reagan, and John Wayne. That was my dad. So I didn't even think the guy ever made mistakes, right? And yet here I'm his son and thinking about, wow, I'm the youngest of 5. So my brother and I were like 6 and 7. We were outside on a hot summer day in our shorts playing with our neighbor kid. And one of our neighbor kids, Joey, came over and started talking to us. Joey was 10 years old and he was at the apex of his earthly wisdom. And Joey said to Ryan and Rodney, my older brother, 20 months, hey, I dare you guys to pull your shorts down and go streaking up and down the neighborhood. Now, in the 70s, there was a term called streaking. I don't know if and it meant like sometimes at high school graduations, the streaker would streak across the stage. I see someone nodding her head here. Were you the streaker or did you witness it? Okay. She was not the streaker. Okay. But she knows what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you for that affirmation. So anyway, So guess what? My brother pulls his shorts down and starts streaking. So dumb goes first, and then dumber, myself, goes right behind him. So my mother gets a phone call from the neighbor's mom. Mrs. Wright, your boys are out front streaking up and down the neighborhood with their shorts off, right? So my mom says she had a beehive hairdo. She's like, whoa, unraveled, I'm sure. Get in the house right now. You're grounded. Stay in your room till your dad gets home, right? So, when you're grounded in the summer, how many know those 5 hours are like forever, right? It's just like for eternity. So we're waiting in our room. Dad comes home. My dad died, it'll be a year this month, the 28th. And he was 94 years old, ended up being one of my best friends. Know my story, and that's a whole nother piece of it. But when my dad came home, he was a workaholic, and he gave a lot of work to build churches, and he didn't always have a lot of emotional energy or understanding of how to help in this area. So I don't say this to shame him. I just say if he would have known better, he could have done better. And so what he did, though, he went into my brother's room, and he kind of demonized this curiosity that these little boys have of taking a dare, streaking. And I remember him speaking very harshly to my brother, how evil this is evil, don't do this. And that we're going to, really shaming. And this makes us look bad and punishing. And I remember him saying to my brother, pull your pants down, and spanking him on the backside. And as a little boy, I hear this through the wall. And now my dad's coming into my room. And I'm thinking, as a little boy, all hell's about to break loose in this room. Should I run out that window? I literally had that thought. And when my dad came into my room, he said the same thing to me and did the same thing to me. And in my tears, I'll never forget this. This was a piece of some of my trauma. When he walked out of my room that day, I had this thought as a little boy. He's not safe. Whatever you do, don't ever let him catch you making a mistake, because this is what happens. And I took that image and projected that on my father because of this experience. And then I took that experience and projected that on God. God's not safe. Whatever you do, don't let God catch you making mistakes, because this is what you get. Because I perceive God as punitive, not redemptive. Not trying to lead us toward healing and health. So what Rodney and Ryan needed wasn't punishment or shame. It was to be set on their dad's lap to say, now, Rodney, we talked about this before. Your body is so good. It's wonderful. And nudity is okay. And Rodney, when you take a shower, I want you to take all your clothes off. The shower is the right place to take all your clothes off. And when you go to the bathroom, please pull your pants down. This makes it far more effective for your mom and I when you do this, right? So appropriate times for nudity. But Rodney, the driveway, the front yard is never a place for nudity. Now, you're a little slower than your brother Ryan, so I'm going to go over this again. Shower, okay. Nudity not, right? You get what I'm saying? So they know how to train and guide, not shame and punish. So be careful with your language when your kids make a mistake or they're curious about sexuality, about their bodies. Little boys can have an erection in the first 5 minutes of birth. Little girls can vaginally lubricate in the first 24 hours of birth. They're just sexual beings. As they're curious about their bodies, just try to train and guide about what's appropriate and inappropriate. Places and times.
When you think about your kids just being curious, when there's a correction moment, if you can have a mindset of, is this a training time, right? Sometimes things need a consequence. Other times it's curiosity, it's growing, it's learning. And even just having that mindset of like, is this an opportunity for training versus a consequence or versus, a correction? Yeah. And that's really a helpful kind of paradigm to take a look at that. We wrote a couple of examples down that I'll just read through of different ways that we can talk. Sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it, right? We use language that we heard from our parents, or we just we're frustrated, and so shaming language would be, why did you do that? What's wrong with you? What were you thinking? Kind of degrading. You've made our family look bad. Shame on you. Condemning words. Nudity is always bad. Absolute words. Training could be, just because someone dares you to do something, it doesn't mean you have to do it. I've made mistakes too. What can we learn from this? I think that's a great one whenever we put ourselves kind of in that position of mom or dad had this question when we were young. I wish I could have asked someone, or let's talk about it. Nudity is okay when you're in the bathroom changing your clothes in your room, but not in public. So just a couple of different ways of looking at it. I'm going to move us on because we're getting to the end, and I know there's childcare in there, and I always have a heart for them. So focusing on growth, not perfection. So again, just if you can take that principle and think about that, how am I focusing on the growth of my child, especially if you grew up in a home with perfectionism or you naturally lean towards that? How can I make that shift so that we have a growth mindset? We actually are expecting that people are going to make mistakes and not know everything because they started out, right? If you have a newborn, you know they started out not knowing anything, and they're learning as they go.
Little boy said to his dad, "Dad, do you think Jesus ever made any mistakes?" 5-year-old boy. Dad thought for a second, said, "That's a great question, son. What do you think?" And the little 5-year-old boy thought for a second, and he said, "Well, if he never made mistakes, how did he learn anything?" Think about that, right? Jesus didn't say when he was 2, and Mary went to the mom's group on Thursday afternoon, right, or morning. "Hey, Mom, don't worry about potty training. I got all this squared away. I'm the Son of God." Right? Or maybe I won't need to learn how to walk. I'm the Savior of the world. Like, walking's going to be easy, right? Did Jesus ever stumble? Did Jesus ever misspell a word? Maybe when he made his first carpenter table, his father said, "Jesus, you measure twice, cut once. That last table you made was not good. You should be like the Savior of the world because you're a bad carpenter." You know what I mean? But just don't see all mistakes as sin. See mistakes as part of our learning process. And if you can have that mindset when it comes to helping your kids on sexuality, you're helping them learn how to steward and manage this gift in healthier ways. In this chapter, we also write a lot about masturbation because we think that's a subject that the church is really afraid to address. And we write a continuum of thought about masturbation. So let me just say this. We work for Pure Desire Ministries where people take a part of how God made them, their sexuality, and misuse it in unhealthy ways. They mismanage this part, and it becomes addictive and destructive when connected to pornography, and it gets mismanaged. So that's a piece of that puzzle, but we just write a lot of different ways to think about it, ways to communicate about it without demonizing their body and helping them now be stewards of this aspect of how they grow.
And without giving you the answer. Rodney and Traci know what God thinks about this, and we're giving you the answer. Really, our heart is to lower shame so that you would have the conversation with your kids. Most of them are going to experience that in adolescence and throughout life. How do we open up the conversation so we lower shame? So a problem doesn't become a pattern, right? If I can help, if we're not in secrecy, a problem cannot become a pattern.
So our kids, maybe one, it's a part of their adolescent learning. For another one, it becomes problematic when connected to something unhealthy. So just learning how to think about it, that's a great question to go home and ask your husband today. "Hun, what was your opinion on masturbation? The speaker wanted us to know," right? That'll just light up the conversation around the table today, you know. He'll probably, go ahead, Tracy, we'll move on. Yeah.
I'm going to skip to keep modeling. So the modeling part is, I used to say to Rodney, it's more important what you're doing than what you're saying. Because at some point, they're not quite listening, and we're like, oh, I don't know that they're listening. I'm saying all that I know to say. So continue to keep modeling. One of the biggest principles we like to think about is your children are listening to everything you say. So even how you respond to mistakes, whether it's someone you don't know and it's on the news, or it's your neighbor, right? How I respond and how I talk about other people and their mistakes, if we can model even in that of like, oh, you know, I've made mistakes, and I hope that person is getting some help, or that somebody can talk to them about that.
When I came to my dad as an adult and said, "Dad, I've struggled with pornography," I thought that would take care of everything for me. But I found that he was a different man in his early 80s than he was when I was 7 years old. And so it was beautiful to watch his growth, even in his older age. You're only young once, but you can be immature your whole life. So one of the best things we do as followers of Jesus is keep following and keep growing. And then
this is just about growth mindset. I want Rodney to end with the never turn away. He shares a story in this, and hopefully we can keep him to 4 minutes on this story.
Yeah. How many will give me 4 minutes?
Story, though.
Will you give me 4 minutes? Raise your hand if you'll give me 4 minutes. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Okay, I got 20 minutes. Okay. But never turn away. This is a last chapter in our book, Last Principle we talk about. I didn't grow up as a young boy, more in the purity culture, where it was about just doing everything right and staying pure. And we didn't dance because dance led to cigarettes, and we didn't smoke cigarettes because it led to movies, and we didn't go to movies because it led to sex, and we didn't have sex because it led to the worst sin of all, bowling. You know what I mean? It's like everything was kind of wrong, and you're just trying to cipher it out. You know what I mean? And then as a youth pastor, it came that purity ring culture. Maybe some of you remember that if you, maybe your parents are, this whole, and I think the heart behind it was good. The heart said this: we want young people to make healthy decisions on how they manage their sexuality. I couldn't cheer that on any longer. But how they went about it sometimes, in my opinion, wasn't as much empowering as it was maybe creating more shame-based for the individual. I grew up with a ton of shame about my sexuality. Have done a lot of work of just trying to redeem that I'm made in God's image and I'm good, and I've learned to steward this now and found healing in this part of my life. But I remember when my daughter Whitney turned 16, she's our oldest, and I took her out on a special date, and I wanted to get her a ring. So I took her to a place where they paint your fingernails and your toenails. And this is called a manicure for the hands. And I got her fingernails done, and we went to look at rings, and she tried on this one ring, and the jeweler said, "Mr. Wright, that ring costs $10,000. And I said to my daughter, "Oh, we're so close. It doesn't match your eyes, but we are so close. So let's keep looking." So we found another ring that fit her eyes perfectly and matched my budget. It was in the hundreds, not the thousands. And I said to her, "Whitney, I want to give you this ring. And a part of the reason why I want to give you this ring is because for me, growing up in my life, I had so much shame around the aspect of my life about my sexuality." I said, I believe that you want to manage your sexuality in healthy ways, but life happens and things happen in your life. So this is not a promise ring. This isn't a promise that you have to make to us. This is a promise that we're making to you. And I'm calling this ring a value ring. And this ring means that your worth and value will never change in my eyes, regardless of your behavior. You will always be my daughter, and Mom and I will always love you, and we will never turn from you. We will always be there to help you. And hon, I want you to make healthier decisions than I did, but I wouldn't give you a ring that said, "Promise me you'll never cheat, promise me you'll never lie, promise me you'll never steal, promise me you'll never gossip, promise me you'll never overeat," right? Overeat, right? Gluttonous, right? Honey, you don't have enough fingers and I don't have enough rings for you to make all these promises. But I want you to make decisions in your life because you understand your worth and value. And if you understand your worth and value, you'll be more apt to make decisions from the inside because you realize, oh, I'm deeply loved regardless. And I found that love is the greatest thing, that is the power of God that really changes our hearts when we see our worth and value. And so it reminds me of that story because I grew up in a faith community where I felt so much shame around my sexuality. And for some of you here that have maybe struggled like me and have a history, I just would say to you, if I could today, I would have a ring for you. And I would have a moment where I could say, you are the beloved daughter of God, always have been, always will be. And your worth and value has never changed. And it's never been based on what you've done right or done wrong. It's intrinsic about who you are. And may you feel the love and embrace of God that can heal your soul. And to me, that was the story of the prodigal son. When the son came home and said, "Dad, I'm not worthy to be your son," right? This was another piece of his repentance because he thought in the pig's pen, "I'm just going to come home. I'm not worthy to be your son." And then his father stopped him and said, quick, kill the calf. Someone call a DJ, get a coat, get a ring. And then he said, "Oh yeah, shoes, and get the ring." You know what the ring was? It was a family crest where they dipped it in wax and would sign documents. So you could almost see when the son left the father, he took off his ring, and it was almost like he threw it at his dad and said, "I don't want anything to do with you or the family." Maybe the dad took the ring and went to grief class and said, "I'm grieving for the loss of my son." But when his son came home and didn't feel worth being a son, just a slave, second-class Christian, I'd missed God's will, plan A, the father said, "No, you have always been my son. You've always been my child." And I can almost just imagine that moment when, poof, a paradigm shifted for that boy, where he realized the love of God. It wasn't punitive. It was instructive. And I say that today because sometimes our kids won't make the best decisions. They're going to navigate a world. And if you're someone that has navigated that, or you're managing family that has I think the heart of God on this whole area is we don't turn even though our kids struggle. They may struggle and turn, but our disposition says, I'll always love you, and I want to be here to help you any way I can. So anyway, thank you for letting me share that story as we conclude our time. Hopefully this will be helpful.
Thank you for letting us share today. So good to be here with you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Rodney and Traci. Such good, meaningful content that even as moms of little ones, I feel like there's so many practical tips to walk away with. So thank you so much for that. They'll do a little closing spiel at the end, so you have that to look forward to. All right, we are